The night I escaped my stepmother's castle, I heard her whisper, "Tomorrow, we'll sell the Omega girl before she runs." My blood froze as those words sliced through the darkness. They planned to sell me to slave traders at dawn. I had 6 hours to escape, or I'd vanish forever into a nightmare worse than death. Chapter 1. The Weight of Steel. The executioner's axe fell with a wet thud that echoed through the courtyard, and King Marcello watched without flinching as another corrupt noble met his end. Blood pooled crimson against the worn stone, and the gathered crowd dispersed in hushed whispers. Justice had been served, swift and merciless, as it always was under his rule. Marcello adjusted his black leather gloves, feeling the familiar weight of his crown upon his brow. The golden circlet had belonged to his father, and his father before him, but it had never felt heavier than it did in these moments. Each execution was necessary, each death a statement that corruption would not be tolerated in his kingdom. Yet with every swing of the blade, something inside him grew colder. The Alpha King's reputation preceded him wherever he went, a ruler who showed no mercy to those who betrayed the realm's trust. His subjects feared him, his enemies respected him, and his allies obeyed him without question. This was the order he had built, the peace he maintained through strength and unwavering resolve. As he turned to leave the courtyard, his captain approached with measured steps. "My lord, there are disturbing reports from the southern estates. Another young woman has vanished, likely sold to slavers. The duke's daughter from Raven's Hollow was among those taken." Marcello's jaw tightened. These crimes against the innocent were the one corruption he seemed unable to stamp out completely. "Double the patrols," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded armies. "And bring me the names of every merchant who has traveled those roads in the past fortnight." The captain bowed and departed, leaving Marcello alone with his thoughts and the lingering scent of death in the air. Somewhere in his kingdom, evil continued to flourish despite his iron rule, and that knowledge burned within him like a festering wound. Chapter 2. Echoes in Empty Halls. The royal chambers felt vast and cold as Marcello dismissed his servants for the night. Candlelight flickered against tapestried walls depicting his ancestors' victories, their painted eyes seeming to judge him from beyond the grave. He poured himself wine from a crystal decanter, the liquid dark as blood in the amber light. Reports scattered across his oak desk told the same grim story. Young Omega women disappearing from their homes, sold into slavery by those who should have protected them. Each document bore official seals. Each investigation had ended without arrests. The criminals remained shadows, always one step ahead of his justice. Marcello's fingers traced the rim of his goblet as memories he tried to suppress began to surface. His mother's face, beautiful and gentle, appeared unbidden in his mind. She had been executed in this very courtyard 20 years ago, condemned for loving beneath her station. The irony was not lost on him. He who now ruled with such harsh justice had once been powerless to save the one person he loved most. Mercy is weakness, his father had told him after the execution. Love makes kings into fools, and fools cannot protect their people. Those words had shaped him, molded him into the unyielding sovereign he had become. Yet in quiet moments like these, he wondered if his father had been right, or if something essential had died with his mother that day. A sudden commotion in the courtyard below drew him to the window. Torches blazed as a messenger rode hard through the gates, his horse lathered with sweat. Marcello watched the man dismount and race toward the castle entrance. Within moments, a knock echoed through his chambers. "Enter," he commanded, already knowing that whatever news arrived at this hour would demand his immediate attention. Chapter 3. First Light of Dawn. The forest road bore the scars of violence when Marcello arrived with his guard at first light. Wagon wheels lay splintered against ancient oaks, and dried blood stained the earth where innocent lives had been torn apart. His destrier snorted nervously, sensing the lingering traces of fear and death that hung in the morning mist. "The bandits took 3 women, my lord," reported his tracker, kneeling beside disturbed soil. "But there was resistance here. One fought back." Marcello studied the scene with practiced eyes, reading the story written in broken branches and scattered belongings. This had been no random attack. It bore the hallmarks of organized slavers with a specific target in mind. A faint sound reached his ears through the trees, metal against metal, and a voice raised in defiance. "This way!" he barked to his men, spurring his horse toward the disturbance. Through the undergrowth, he glimpsed a clearing where rough men in leather armor surrounded a slight figure bound with iron chains. The young woman knelt in the center of their circle, her torn dress revealing bruises and cuts. Yet her bearing remained proud. Auburn hair fell across her face, but her green eyes blazed with unbroken spirit as she glared at her captors. When their leader raised his hand to strike her, she did not flinch. Instead, she spoke with quiet dignity that carried clearly through the forest air. "You may chain my body, but my soul remains free," she said, her voice steady despite her circumstances. Something in those words stirred an unexpected emotion in Marcello's chest, a recognition of strength that mirrored his own, yet tempered with a grace he had long since abandoned. He raised his sword and signaled the charge, but for the first time in years, his motivation transcended mere duty. This woman deserved better than the cruelty of lesser men. Chapter 4. Blood and Honor. Steel sang through morning air as Marcello's blade found its first target. The bandit leader's sword shattered against the king's superior weapon, and before the man could scream, Marcello's point had pierced his heart. Around them, the royal guard made swift work of the remaining slavers, their training evident in every calculated strike. When the last enemy fell, an unusual quiet settled over the clearing. Marcello dismounted and approached the chained woman, his bloodied sword still in hand. She watched him without fear, studying his face with intelligent eyes that seemed to see deeper than most dared look. "Are you injured beyond what I can observe?" he asked, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. "I am intact, my lord," she replied, and he noticed she did not use his title. "Though I fear you arrived too late for others. They spoke of delivering me alive, but the other women—" Her voice caught slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. Marcello found himself wanting to offer comfort, an impulse he had not felt in decades. He examined her shackles, noting their quality, and the merchant's marks stamped into the iron. "These chains bear the seal of House Ravencrest," he observed, his mind already working through the implications. Someone with significant resources funded this operation. The revelation sparked cold fury in his chest, not the calculated anger of a king dispensing justice, but something far more personal. As his men freed her from the bonds, she stumbled slightly, but refused his offered hand. "I can stand on my own," she said with quiet pride, "though I thank you for your intervention, King Marcello." The way she spoke his name, without servile deference or practiced flattery, intrigued him. Here was someone who addressed him as a man, rather than a crown, and he found that distinction both unsettling and strangely appealing. Chapter 5. Questions Without Answers. The castle's infirmary had never hosted a guest quite like Isabella of Raven's Hollow. As the royal physician tended her wounds, Marcello found himself studying her with unusual intensity. Her responses to questioning were forthright but careful, revealing a sharp intelligence behind her composed demeanor. She spoke of her father's recent death and her stepmother's growing coldness with clinical detachment. Lady Genevieve claimed my inheritance was forfeit due to unpaid debts, Isabella explained, as the physician applied salve to her wrists. She produced documents bearing my father's seal, though I never saw him sign such papers. When I questioned their authenticity, she became volatile. Her pause suggested volumes left unsaid about her stepmother's treatment. Marcello leaned forward in his chair, his interest piqued by the mention of forged documents. These papers, did they bear the royal treasury's endorsement? When Isabella nodded, pieces began falling into place in his mind. Someone within his own government had sanctioned the theft of a noble's inheritance, making them complicit in whatever scheme had led to her capture. "You speak of these events without anger," he observed, genuinely curious about her emotional restraint. "Most would rage against such betrayal." Isabella met his gaze directly, her green eyes holding depths he could not immediately fathom. "Anger is a luxury I could not afford, my lord. Survival requires clarity of mind, not fury of heart." Her words resonated with him more than he expected. Here was someone who understood the necessity of controlling one's emotions, of prioritizing logic over sentiment. Yet, unlike his own cold calculations, her composure seemed to spring from wisdom rather than emptiness. As she spoke, he found himself genuinely interested in her thoughts, rather than merely gathering information for his investigation. Chapter 6. The Choice Made. The Royal Council chamber buzzed with heated discussion as Marcello's advisors debated Isabella's fate. Lord Chancellor Damien, a man whose political instincts had served the crown for 30 years, spoke with characteristic bluntness. "The girl is damaged goods, Your Majesty. Her presence here raises questions about your judgment. Send her to a convent where she can disappear from political consideration." Marcello listened to their arguments with growing irritation. These men spoke of Isabella as if she were property to be disposed of, rather than a victim of crimes committed within his realm. Their casual dismissal of her suffering revealed the very corruption he had spent years trying to eliminate from his court. "The precedent concerns me, my lord," added Lord Treasurer Blackwood, his tone unctuous with false concern. "If word spreads that the crown shelters questionable women, it could damage your reputation among the noble houses. Perhaps it would be better to let House Ravencrest handle their own affairs internally." The suggestion that he abandon Isabella to her stepmother's mercy sparked something fierce and protective in Marcello's chest. He rose from his throne, his presence commanding immediate silence from the assembled lords. "Lady Isabella remains under royal protection," he declared, his voice carrying the absolute authority that had never been successfully challenged. "Anyone who questions this decision questions me directly." The stunned silence that followed his pronouncement told him everything he needed to know about how unexpected his defense had been. For the first time in his reign, he had acted from emotion rather than cold political calculation. The realization should have disturbed him, but instead, he felt oddly liberated. Isabella had done something to him in their brief encounters, awakened feelings he had thought permanently buried with his mother. Chapter 7. Whispers in Stone Halls. Within days of Isabella's arrival, the castle's atmosphere had shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Servants whispered in corners about the mysterious woman under the king's protection, their speculation growing bolder with each passing hour. Marcello found himself walking past the quarters he had assigned her more frequently than duty required, though he told himself it was merely to ensure her safety. The rumors reached his ears in fragments. Some claimed she was a sorceress who had enchanted him. Others suggested she was a political pawn in some larger game. Lord Damien had been particularly vocal about his concerns, warning that the king's judgment was being questioned by influential nobles who viewed his protection of Isabella as weakness rather than justice. Marcello's dreams had become troubled since her arrival, filled with images that blurred the line between memory and imagination. He would see Isabella standing where his mother once stood before her execution, but instead of fear, she radiated the same calm strength she had shown in the forest. These visions left him unsettled, questioning emotions he had thought safely buried beneath years of rigid self-control. During his daily inspection of the castle grounds, he encountered Isabella in the stable courtyard, speaking softly to a young Omega servant who had been weeping. Her gentle words and compassionate touch calmed the girl in ways that royal commands never could. Watching this display of natural empathy, Marcello felt something shift inside him, a recognition that strength could manifest in forms other than dominance and fear. When Isabella noticed his presence, she curtsied formally, but without the servile deference he was accustomed to receiving. "Your Majesty," she greeted him, then added quietly, "Young Sarah received disturbing news from her village." Sometimes comfort matters more than commands. Her words carried no criticism, yet they highlighted a truth he had long ignored, that his iron rule, while maintaining order, had created a court where compassion was scarce. Chapter 8: Lessons in Light. Isabella's presence in the castle continued to create ripples that reached far beyond the royal quarters. Marcello observed how servants who had once moved through their duties with mechanical efficiency now paused to exchange kind words with her. She remembered their names, inquired about their families, and listened with genuine interest to their concerns, qualities that made her beloved among the staff in ways his authority never could. When he found her in the castle library, reading by candlelight, Marcello was struck by how naturally she fit into the scholarly environment. Books on law and history surrounded her, and she was taking careful notes in a precise hand. "I seek to understand the kingdom I find myself within," she explained when he inquired about her studies. "Knowledge provides context for justice." Their conversation that evening revealed depths to her intellect that both impressed and challenged him. She spoke of governance with insights that rivaled his most trusted advisors, yet her perspective was tempered by empathy rather than purely political calculation. A crown's weight should be measured not by the fear it inspires, but by the hope it nurtures, she observed, her words hanging in the air between them like a gentle accusation. As they discussed the complexities of ruling, Marcello found himself sharing thoughts he had never voiced to another soul. The isolation of leadership, the burden of making decisions that affected thousands of lives, the constant vigilance required to maintain order, all of it spilled forth in the quiet sanctuary of the library. Isabella listened without judgment, offering perspectives that illuminated angles he had never considered. When their discussion finally ended and they prepared to part ways, Isabella paused at the library door. "Power without kindness breeds monsters, Your Majesty," she said softly. "But I do not believe you are one, despite what others may whisper." Her words followed him back to his chambers, echoing in his mind long after sleep should have claimed him. For the first time in years, someone saw past his crown to the man beneath. Chapter 9. The First Battle. The attack on Isabella's character came from an unexpected quarter. Lord Steward Blackthorne, a man whose family had served the crown for generations, publicly accused her of using witchcraft to influence the king's decisions. The accusation was carefully crafted, serious enough to damage her reputation, yet vague enough to be difficult to disprove definitively. Marcello's fury when he learned of the accusation was swift and terrible. He had built his reputation on careful deliberation and measured responses. But the suggestion that Isabella had somehow corrupted his judgment struck at the very core of his identity as a ruler. The implication that he could be so easily manipulated was an insult he would not tolerate from anyone, regardless of their station. The confrontation took place in the great hall before the assembled court. Blackthorn, confident in his political position, presented his case with practiced eloquence. "The king's uncharacteristic behavior since this woman's arrival speaks for itself," he declared. "His Majesty's usually sound judgment has been clouded by influences we cannot ignore." Marcello's response was swift and devastating. Rising from his throne with the controlled fury of a predator, he stripped Blackthorn of his titles and lands with words that cut like blade strikes. "You speak of judgment, Lord Blackthorn," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "My judgment tells me that any man who accuses an innocent woman of sorcery to advance his own position is unfit to serve this crown." The destruction of Blackthorn's career sent shockwaves through the court, but it also marked a turning point in Marcello's reign. He had chosen compassion over political expedience, protection over popular opinion. As he watched the disgraced lord escorted from the hall, he felt Isabella's presence behind him like a warm light against his back. "Mercy has a price, my king," she whispered later, "but so does its absence." Chapter 10. Shadows of Truth. The investigation into Lady Genevieve's crimes uncovered a web of corruption that reached deeper into the kingdom's foundations than Marcello had anticipated. Forged documents, bribed officials, and missing treasury funds painted a picture of systematic theft that had been occurring for years. Each revelation made Isabella's suffering seem less like an isolated incident and more like part of a calculated campaign. Master Cornelius, the kingdom's chief investigator, presented his findings with grim satisfaction. "Lady Genevieve has been systematically looting noble estates, using forged death certificates and falsified debt documents," he reported. "The royal seal on these papers suggests someone within the treasury itself is complicit in these crimes." The implications were staggering. Corruption had infected the very heart of Marcello's government. When Marcello ordered the arrest of treasury officials for questioning, he encountered unexpected resistance. Lord Treasurer Blackwood, normally obsequious to the point of annoyance, suddenly developed a backbone when faced with scrutiny of his department. "Your Majesty's zealousness in this matter may be misguided," he suggested, with nervous sweat beading his forehead. "Perhaps Lady Isabella has influenced your perspective on these administrative matters." The thinly veiled suggestion that his judgment was compromised ignited Marcello's temper once again. However, this time his anger was tempered by cold calculation rather than hot fury. Someone was working very hard to make this investigation disappear, which meant they had much to hide. The attempted destruction of treasury records the following night confirmed his suspicions. Someone was desperate enough to commit treason to protect their secrets. As he stood in the smoldering ruins of the record room, watching years of financial documentation reduced to ash, Marcello realized that Isabella's case had exposed something far more dangerous than simple greed. The systematic nature of the corruption, the coordination required to forge royal seals, the willingness to destroy evidence, all pointed to a conspiracy that threatened the very stability of his reign. Chapter 11. Blood and Birthright. The secret archive hidden beneath the cathedral yielded secrets that changed everything Marcello thought he knew about Isabella's identity. Brother Francis, the elderly monk who maintained the hidden records, approached him with trembling hands and documents that bore the previous king's personal seal. "Your Majesty must see this," the old man whispered. "The girl you protect, she is not what she appears to be." The birth certificate revealed a truth that struck Marcello like a physical blow. Isabella was not merely a noble's daughter fallen on hard times. She was the hidden child of King Edmund's brother, Prince Aldwin, and Queen Morwen's sister, Lady Catelyn. Royal blood flowed in her veins, making her a legitimate claimant to the throne he now occupied. Understanding crashed over him in waves. Lady Genevieve's actions were not merely greed-driven theft. They were calculated attempts to eliminate a rival bloodline. The forged documents, the planned sale into slavery, even the systematic looting of her inheritance, all served to erase any trace of Isabella's royal heritage. Someone had been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. The revelation placed Marcello in an impossible position. As a king, he should view Isabella as a potential threat to his reign. As a man, he found himself drawn to her in ways that transcended political calculation. The irony was bitter. The woman who had begun to heal his wounded heart carried the bloodline that could justify rebellion against his rule. Sitting alone in the archive chamber, surrounded by centuries of royal secrets, Marcello faced a choice that would define both his reign and his soul. He could suppress this knowledge, ensure Isabella never learned of her heritage, and continue ruling unopposed. Or he could honor the truth, regardless of its consequences for his crown. The decision, he realized, would reveal whether he was truly the just king he believed himself to be, or merely another tyrant clinging to power. Chapter 12. The Price of Truth. The emergency council session convened at dawn, with Marcello's most trusted advisors gathering in the secure chamber, where the kingdom's most sensitive matters were discussed. The revelation of Isabella's royal bloodline had turned a simple case of noble corruption into a potential constitutional crisis. Lord Chancellor Damien's face was pale as he studied the documents that proved Isabella's legitimate claim to royal consideration. "The precedent is clear, Your Majesty," Damien said carefully. "Royal blood, even through a female line, cannot be ignored. The girl has a legitimate claim that some nobles might choose to support over your own." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. Isabella's existence threatened not just Marcello's reign, but the stability of the entire kingdom. General Thorne, commander of the Royal Guard, spoke with military bluntness. "The simplest solution is elimination, my lord. A tragic accident, perhaps, or a convenient fever. Many would understand the necessity." His suggestion was delivered without emotion, as if discussing the disposal of a strategic obstacle rather than a human life. The casual discussion of Isabella's murder ignited something fierce and protective in Marcello's chest. These men spoke of ending the life of someone who had already endured more suffering than any person should bear. The thought of her gentle spirit, extinguished by political calculation, was intolerable to him, regardless of the threat she might represent to his throne. "Lady Isabella will be protected," he declared with finality that brooked no argument. "Any who threaten her answer to me personally." The decision marked a point of no return. He had chosen love over power, heart over crown. As his advisors exchanged worried glances, Marcello realized he was no longer the same man who had ruled through fear and calculation. Isabella had changed him, and he found he welcomed that transformation, whatever its cost. Chapter 13. Flight Through Shadows. The midnight escape from the castle required careful planning and absolute secrecy. Marcello had dismissed his usual guards, entrusting Isabella's safety to only 2 men, whose loyalty he trusted without question. Wrapped in common cloaks and traveling on unremarkable horses, they made their way through hidden passages and forgotten trails that even his own spy network rarely used. Isabella rode beside him with the same calm composure she had shown throughout their ordeal, though he could sense the questions she held back out of respect for his concentrated focus. The weight of abandoning his throne, even temporarily, pressed upon him like a physical burden. Every step away from the castle was a step toward uncertain exile, yet he felt no regret for the choice he had made. "Where do we ride?" "My lord," she finally asked as they paused to rest their horses beside a moonlit stream. The question was practical, but he heard deeper concerns in her voice: worry for the kingdom left behind, uncertainty about their future, perhaps even guilt that her presence had brought such chaos to his ordered world. "To safety first," he replied, studying her face in the silver light. "Beyond that, I cannot say with certainty. Your life is worth more than my crown, Isabella. I would rather rule over nothing than allow harm to come to you." The admission surprised him with its complete honesty. Somewhere in their journey together, protecting her had become more important than protecting his power. As they continued their midnight flight, Marcello found himself stealing glances at the woman who had transformed his life so completely. Her presence beside him felt natural, despite the chaos surrounding them, as if they had been meant to face these trials together. For the first time since his coronation, he was not a king first and a man second. He was simply Marcello, riding through the darkness with the woman he had come to love. Chapter 14, Sanctuary and Truth. The abandoned chapel where they sought shelter had once been a place of worship for traveling pilgrims, but years of neglect had reduced it to crumbling stone walls and a roof that leaked starlight. Marcello secured their horses while Isabella gathered dried wood for a small fire, their movements coordinated by necessity rather than spoken agreement. As Isabella tended a cut on his sword arm that he had not even noticed acquiring, Marcello found himself studying her face in the flickering firelight. Her touch was gentle but sure, her concentration complete as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. "You have experience with injuries," he observed, and she nodded without looking up from her work. "My stepmother was not always kind," she replied simply. "I learned to tend my own wounds, and later those of servants who suffered similar treatment." The casual admission of abuse sparked fresh anger in Marcello's chest, but Isabella seemed to sense his reaction. "The past has shaped me, but it does not define me. What matters is what we choose to do with the strength our trials have given us." Unable to contain the burden of knowledge any longer, Marcello told her about the documents he had discovered. He watched her face as he explained her true heritage, saw the shock and disbelief give way to understanding as pieces of her life suddenly made sense. "That explains why my stepmother was so determined to erase every trace of my existence," she whispered. "She knew what I was before I did." The revelation changed nothing between them, yet everything. Isabella looked at him with a new understanding of what his protection had cost him. Not just a king defending a subject, but a ruler risking his throne for someone whose very existence challenged his right to rule. "You should have let them eliminate the threat I represent," she said softly. "It would have been the wise choice." Marcello took her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hardship overcome through strength and grace. "Wisdom without love is merely clever cruelty. I choose love." Chapter 15, The Hunter's Trap. Dawn brought the sound of hoofbeats and the rattle of armor as royal guards surrounded the chapel. Marcello cursed himself for believing they could escape so easily. Someone had anticipated his moves and positioned forces to intercept them. Through the broken windows, he could see at least 20 men in the distinctive black and gold of the royal guard, led by a knight whose face he recognized with bitter disappointment. Sir Gareth Blackheart, a man Marcello had personally elevated from common birth to knighthood, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, I am commanded to escort you back to the castle for your own protection. The kingdom requires your presence during these troubled times." The formal language could not disguise the fact that this was an arrest, not a rescue. Marcello's hand moved instinctively to his sword, but Isabella's gentle touch on his arm stayed his action. "Do not spill blood on my account," she urged quietly. "These men serve the crown, as they must. Your kingdom needs you alive more than we need freedom." Her selfless concern for others, even in the face of her own peril, reminded him why he had fallen in love with her. As they were separated for the journey back to the castle, Isabella caught his eyes one final time. "Remember who you truly are, Marcello," she said, using his name rather than his title. "Not the crown you wear, but the man you choose to be." Her words followed him as he was escorted away, a reminder that his identity ran deeper than his royal station. The return to the castle felt like a funeral procession, with Marcello riding under guard like a prisoner rather than a king. The people who gathered to watch their sovereign's humiliation wore expressions of confusion and concern. He had built his reputation on strength and control, yet here he rode defeated by his own emotions. As the castle gates closed behind them, he realized that this might be the last time he entered his home as its master. Chapter 16: The Weight of Chains. The dungeons beneath the castle had been built by his grandfather to hold enemies of the realm, but Marcello had never imagined he would experience them as a prisoner. The irony was not lost on him, as he sat on the narrow stone bench that served as both seat and bed, contemplating how quickly a king could become a captive in his own domain. Lord Chancellor Damien visited him on the second day, his aged face grave with the weight of constitutional crisis. "The council has voted to strip you of royal authority, pending a determination of your mental fitness to rule," he announced with obvious reluctance. "Your defense of the girl has been deemed evidence of compromised judgment that threatens the stability of the realm." The mechanism of his downfall was elegant in its simplicity. By choosing love over duty, he had provided his enemies with the justification they needed to remove him from power. No blood needed to be spilled, no dramatic rebellion required. His own actions had painted him as unfit to rule, making his disposal seem like responsible governance rather than treasonous ambition. "And what of Isabella?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Damien's silence spoke volumes before he finally replied. "The council deems her a threat that must be resolved. Her bloodline cannot be allowed to complicate the succession." The euphemistic language could not soften the reality. They intended to kill her to eliminate the chaos her existence had created. Alone in his cell as darkness fell, Marcello faced the complete collapse of everything he had built. His throne was lost, his power stripped away, and the woman he loved faced execution because of choices he had made. The man who had once commanded armies and dispensed justice with absolute authority now sat powerless to protect the one person who truly mattered to him. Chapter 17: The Architect of Ruin. Lady Genevieve's visit to his cell came with all the theatrical triumph of a villain savoring her victory. Dressed in fine silks that mocked the poverty she had imposed on Isabella, she surveyed his reduced circumstances with obvious satisfaction. "How the mighty have fallen!" she purred, settling herself on the single chair the guards had provided for her comfort. "You orchestrated all of this," Marcello realized, studying her face in the torchlight. "The forged documents, the treasury corruption, even my downfall. None of it was coincidence." Her smile confirmed his suspicions before she spoke, revealing the scope of a conspiracy that had been years in the making. "Royal Advisor Morwen has been most helpful in our arrangements," she confirmed with malicious pleasure. "Did you really think your mother's execution was justice?" She discovered his embezzlement schemes and threatened to expose them. Her death served multiple purposes: eliminating a threat to his wealth and teaching a young prince that love was dangerous. The revelation struck him like a physical blow. His mother had not died for living beneath her station. She had been murdered to protect the same corrupt official who now orchestrated his own downfall. The man who had helped shape his rigid philosophy of emotionless rule had been the architect of the greatest trauma of his life. Tomorrow, your precious Isabella will be sold to foreign slavers, Genevieve continued with vindictive satisfaction. By the time their ship reaches distant shores, she will be nothing but a memory. The royal bloodline will be severed, and order will be restored under more practical leadership. Her words painted a future where justice was abandoned in favor of convenient corruption, where love was punished and cruelty rewarded. Chapter 18. Visions in Darkness. In the depths of despair, Marcello's mind began to fracture under the weight of failure and loss. Sleep brought no peace, only visions that blurred the line between memory and hallucination. His mother appeared to him as she had in life, gentle, wise, and radiantly beautiful. But her face gradually transformed into Isabella's, creating a composite image of the two women who had most shaped his understanding of love. "You have forgotten who you were meant to be," the vision told him with words that seemed to come from both women simultaneously. "Power corrupts your heart, but love can purify it again. Choose mercy over might, compassion over control. The crown you wear matters less than the man you choose to be." The hallucination felt more real than his waking hours, providing clarity that his rational mind could not achieve. He understood now that his rigid philosophy of emotionless rule had been a reaction to trauma rather than wise governance. By suppressing his capacity for love, he had become the very thing his mother would have grieved to see, a ruler without heart. "How do I save her?" he asked in a vision, desperation making him speak aloud to empty air. "How do I undo the damage my choices have caused?" The answer came not in words, but in understanding. Salvation lay not in reclaiming his throne through force, but in embracing the love that had already begun to transform him. As dawn light filtered through his cell window, Marcello emerged from his dark night of the soul with newfound purpose. He was no longer the broken king who had entered this dungeon, nor was he the cold tyrant who had ruled through fear. He was a man reborn through love, ready to fight not for power, but for the woman who had shown him the possibility of becoming whole again. Chapter 19. Brothers in Arms. The sound of metal against stone woke Marcello from fitful sleep as Sir Gareth worked to unlock his cell door. The knight's face was grim with purpose, and behind him stood 3 other guards whose loyalty had proven stronger than political expedients. "My lord," Gareth whispered urgently, "we cannot stand by while justice is perverted and innocence is destroyed." "This will be seen as treason," Marcello warned, though his heart soared at the prospect of freedom. These men were risking everything to follow their conscience rather than convenient orders, demonstrating the kind of moral courage he had once thought extinct in his court. "Our oath was to serve the rightful king and protect the innocent," Gareth replied firmly. "Lady Isabella represents both." As they moved through hidden passages Marcello had not known existed in his own castle, he realized that his rigid rule had blinded him to the loyalty that existed beneath the surface. These men had watched him choose love over power and recognized something worth following in that choice. His transformation had inspired their own courage to act according to principle rather than self-preservation. "Where is Isabella being held?" he asked as they reached a concealed exit that led to the castle's outer grounds. "The East Tower," Gareth replied grimly. "They plan to move her to the docks at dawn for transport to the slaver's ship. We have perhaps 2 hours before it becomes impossible to intercept them." The rescue would require precision and courage, but Marcello felt more confident than he had in days. He was no longer fighting alone. Men of honor stood beside him, and their cause was just. For the first time since his imprisonment, he allowed himself to hope that love might triumph over corruption, that mercy could prove stronger than cruelty. Chapter 20. The Reckoning Begins. The confrontation with royal advisor Morwen took place in the Great Hall before dawn, with Isabella's rescue providing the leverage Marcello needed to expose the conspiracy that had shaped his life. The elderly advisor, roused from sleep and dragged before the assembled court, maintained his dignity even as evidence of his crimes mounted around him like an avalanche. "Your accusations are desperate fabrications," Morwen declared with practiced authority, "the ravings of a deposed king seeking to blame others for his own failures." But his confidence cracked when Marcello produced the original treasury records that had been hidden rather than destroyed, documents that proved decades of systematic theft and corruption. The revelation of Isabella's true heritage sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles, many of whom had been unaware of the royal bloodline they had nearly allowed to be extinguished. Lord Chancellor Damien, faced with irrefutable proof of the conspiracy, formally restored Marcello's authority and ordered the immediate arrest of all conspirators. Lady Genevieve's arrival in chains provided the final piece of the puzzle. Faced with execution for treason, she confessed to her crimes in exchange for life imprisonment, revealing the full scope of the plot that had sought to eliminate Isabella's bloodline and install a more controllable ruler on the throne. As dawn broke over the castle, justice was finally served not through violence and fear, but through truth and evidence. Marcello stood beside Isabella in the great hall, no longer hiding their bond behind political necessity. He had learned that true strength lay not in dominance over others, but in the courage to love openly and protect the innocent, regardless of personal cost. Chapter 21. The Price of Justice. Isabella's rescue from the slaver's cart had been accomplished with minimal bloodshed, but the sight of her unconscious form filled Marcello with a rage that burned hotter than any he had ever known. The chains that marked her wrists spoke of hours of suffering, and the pallor of her face suggested she had been drugged to ensure compliance during transport. As the royal physician worked to counteract whatever substances had been forced upon her, Marcello knelt beside the bed where she lay, her breathing shallow but steady. "I should have protected you better," he whispered, taking her hand in his. "I should have seen the threat before it could touch you." When Isabella's eyes finally opened, the first word she spoke was his name, not his title, but the name that belonged to the man, rather than the crown. "Marcello," she breathed, her voice hoarse from whatever ordeals she had endured. "You came for me?" The wonder in her voice humbled him, as if his rescue was a gift rather than the bare minimum of what love demanded. "Always," he promised, bringing her hand to his lips. "I will always come for you, no matter the cost or consequence." The vow was both a declaration of love and a fundamental change in his understanding of kingship, that true leadership sometimes required personal sacrifice rather than political calculation. As Isabella regained her strength, they talked quietly about the future that lay before them. The kingdom needed healing from the corruption that had infected it, and they would provide that healing together. But first, they had to ensure that justice was served properly, not through vengeance, but through the restoration of order and the protection of the innocent. Chapter 22. Truth in the Light. The final trial in the Great Hall drew representatives from every corner of the kingdom, eager to witness the resolution of events that had shaken the very foundations of royal authority. Marcello presided not as a king seeking vengeance, but as a man committed to justice tempered by mercy. The transformation in his bearing was evident to all who observed the proceedings. The evidence against the conspirators was overwhelming. Forged documents, stolen funds, and testimony from victims whose suffering had been ignored for years. Lady Genevieve, faced with irrefutable proof of her crimes, showed no remorse for the lives she had destroyed in pursuit of wealth and power. Her stepbrother, broken by guilt, confessed to his coerced participation and begged forgiveness from both the crown and his sister. When Marcello announced Isabella's true heritage to the assembled court, the revelation was met with stunned silence, followed by thunderous acclaim. Here was proof that divine providence had guided events. The rightful bloodline had been preserved, and justice had triumphed over conspiracy. The legitimacy of Marcello's rule was strengthened rather than weakened by his protection of Isabella. The sentences he pronounced reflected his evolution as a ruler. Lady Genevieve was condemned to lifelong servitude under Isabella's authority, forced to make amends for her crimes through labor rather than facing execution. Royal advisor Morwen forfeited all wealth and position, spending his remaining days in exile. Justice was served, but mercy tempered the harshest punishments. As the trial concluded and the court began to disperse, Marcello stepped down from his throne to stand beside Isabella on equal ground. The symbolic gesture was not lost on those who witnessed it. Here was a king who had learned that true power came not from elevation above others, but from the courage to stand with those who needed protection. Chapter 23: The Healing Season. The months following the trial brought a transformation to the kingdom that reflected the change in its ruler's heart. Marcello's new approach to governance emphasized justice through restoration, rather than punishment through fear. The court, once a place where political calculation reigned supreme, became a center for healing the wounds that corruption had inflicted on the realm. Isabella's influence was evident in every reform they implemented together. Her natural empathy and keen intelligence helped identify problems that had been overlooked by previous administrations. The plight of Omega citizens, long ignored by those in power, became a central focus of their efforts to create a more just society. Working side by side in the castle's administrative chambers, Marcello and Isabella developed a partnership that transcended their individual strengths. Where he brought experience and authority, she contributed wisdom and compassion. Their collaboration produced policies that were both practical and humane, addressing the kingdom's needs while respecting the dignity of all citizens. The recovery of Isabella's stolen inheritance became a symbol of broader restoration throughout the realm. Lands that had been illegally seized were returned to their rightful owners, and families torn apart by corruption were reunited. The systematic nature of the healing process reflected their commitment to addressing root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. As harvest season approached, the kingdom showed signs of genuine prosperity for the first time in years. Trade routes reopened as confidence in royal justice returned, and the people began to speak of their rulers with affection rather than fear. The transformation was not yet complete, but the foundation for lasting change had been firmly established. Chapter 24: Love's True Measure. The private moment Marcello had long awaited came on a quiet evening as autumn painted the castle gardens in shades of gold and crimson. He and Isabella walked together among the roses his mother had planted decades ago, their conversation flowing as naturally as the stream that wound through the grounds. The peace between them felt as substantial as the stone walls that surrounded them. "Do you ever regret the choices that brought us to this moment?" Isabella asked, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they paused beside the fountain, where he had often come to think during his loneliest years. Her question was gentle, but he sensed genuine concern beneath it, worry that his love for her had cost him more than any man should have to bear. Never, he replied without hesitation, turning to face her fully. You taught me that a crown without compassion is merely an ornament, that power without love is just elaborate cruelty. I was a king before I met you, but I was not a complete man. The admission came easily now, though such emotional honesty would have been impossible for him only months earlier. Isabella's smile illuminated her face with the warmth that had first captivated him in that forest clearing where their journey began. And you taught me that strength and gentleness can coexist, that authority and humility are not opposites, but partners. Together, we have become more than either of us could be alone. As they continued their walk, Marcello reflected on the man he had been and the man he had become. The cold tyrant who had ruled through fear was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true leadership required both wisdom and heart. Isabella had not changed him so much as revealed who he had always been capable of becoming, if only he had possessed the courage to love. Chapter 25. The Crown's Heart. Dawn broke over the castle balcony, where Marcello and Isabella stood together, watching their kingdom awaken to another day of peace and prosperity. The view from the royal chambers had not changed, but everything it represented had been transformed by their love and shared commitment to justice. The realm spread before them like a promise finally fulfilled. A year had passed since the trials that had nearly destroyed them both, and the kingdom bore little resemblance to the fear-ruled domain Marcello had once governed. Markets bustled with honest trade, families reunited by their reforms prospered, and the people spoke of their rulers with genuine affection, rather than grudging obedience. The council awaits us, Isabella reminded him gently, though neither moved to leave their private sanctuary. They had learned to treasure these quiet moments together, understanding that the demands of leadership required them to draw strength from their bond. The kingdom needed both their individual talents and their united wisdom. Let them wait a moment longer, Marcello replied, pulling her closer as the morning light painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. I want to remember this. You, me, our kingdom at peace. These are the moments that make all the struggles worthwhile. The man who had once measured success by fear and submission now found meaning in love and shared purpose. As they finally turned to face the day's responsibilities, Marcello reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Control built my crown," he murmured, echoing words he had spoken months earlier when his transformation began. "But love built my kingdom." Isabella smiled and took his hand, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them, secure in the knowledge that together they could weather any storm and nurture any dream into reality.